Okay, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome, esteemed panelists, if you can hear me. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning from Sharm el-Sheikh. On behalf of FAO, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this event, Scaling Up Disaster and Climate Risk Management Action to Prevent Food Crisis, jointly organized by the Office of Climate Change, Environment and Biodiversity, and the Office of Emergencies and Resilience, and our Statistics Division at FAO. Of course, in collaboration with Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, World Food Programme, and member countries. My name is Kayan Jaff. I am the Senior Policy Officer and also in charge of partnerships and resource mobilization in the Near East and North Africa region of FAO. And I will be guiding you through today's event as moderator. Agriculture, and in particular smallholder farmers, continues to bear the brunt of disaster and climate change impacts, complex, protracted, and systemic disaster and climate risks and impacts, amplified by the interconnected climate and biodiversity crisis, are putting the food security and nutrition at large part of the world's population at a great risk. Agriculture includes crops, livestock, fisheries, aquaculture, and forestry, which absorbs 26% of the overall economic impact of medium and large-scale disasters in least developed countries, LDCs, and low and lower middle-income countries, LMICs. This goes up to 82% of drought alone, as by FAO's statistics in 2021. Over the past 5 years, acute food insecurity has climbed steadily upwards. Up to 828 million people were affected by hunger in 2021. This number has grown by about 150 million since its outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic. The increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events is causing disruption to human and natural systems, and negativity impacting the entire value chain of agri-food systems. This poses a threat to global and local food security, in particular to those most vulnerable and often already experienced food crises. Extreme events, especially when overlaid with other crises, are responsible for the irreversible loss of productive assets, income, livelihoods, and other lives. Understanding and reducing losses in agriculture and food production and distribution system is the key to strengthening the resilience of our agri-food systems. Ongoing efforts to assess disasters and climate change impacts in the agriculture and food sectors are underway to drive improved decision-making and investments. In this event, we will highlight concrete solutions for reducing impacts and discuss possible pathways to urgently scale up support to food crisis countries to address increasing disasters and climate risks and impacts in the protracted crisis settings, and to ensure that those left behind are included, protected, and resilient. Before kicking off the session, allow me to outline the overall shape of our event today. This is a 1-hour session with a keynote speech and panel discussions followed by Q&A sessions. We are honored to have 2 speakers here in the room with us physically and 2 speakers joining us virtually. The keynote speech will be presented virtually by Professor Christophe Gournaud, and the panelists are Mr. Tekini Nakidakida in person, Ms. Christian Arnold in person, and Piero Conforti virtual from our FAO Statistics Division. The keynote speech, please. Professor Christophe, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well. Thank you very much. Do you go to my slides? Or should I
Professor, the floor is yours.
Will you open my slides or should I do this? Otherwise I do this. Give me a second. I can't. The moderator has allowed me to share my slides. Now I can. Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry for this short delay. I hope you see my slides now. Could you just give me a sign that you do this?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So, yeah, good morning, everyone. Very pleased to have you all here, and sorry for not being present in Sharm el-Sheikh. I was there until Wednesday, and now I'm back in Germany with snow in the morning. But I will talk about the attribution of losses and damages and of extreme events from anthropogenic climate change. So, when we talk about loss and damage in agri-food systems, I think this is often overlooked that we have quite different pillars which we have to consider. And of course, most of the discussion on is at the COP is also on adaptation and mitigation, and this is very important, but we have different layers below adaptation and mitigation which we have to consider, and they are going deeper in the risk management, and we may and we will already face differences and limits of adaptation. And I think that's very crucial that we acknowledge this, because this leads us directly to existential losses and damages. So we will have effects of climate change where we cannot adapt to, and we have to discuss on how we address them and also how we compensate these losses. So that's the key of my presentation, where I will dive you a bit deeper in the next minutes. So what is at risk? I think we talk a lot when it comes to losses and damages about sea level rise, about increases of deserts, and these are all very valid, but I think there are also a lot of losses and damages which already occur and will further occur in the agri-food value systems and in the value chain. So, and there we will also have losses of homeland, we will have losses of productive farmland. But not only limited to this, we will also have losses of livelihoods, of sovereignty, of well-being. And I think this is fundamental, because we are talking about smallholder farmers which are affected, and we have already heard in the introduction that we are not only talking about monetary losses, but we will also talk about non-monetary losses. This sounds a bit technical, but we are here talking about lives, and I think that's very important to make sure that we address these existential and non-reversal losses in a way that we have more clearance to quantify them, first of all, and with this also have mechanisms at place to finance these losses and also compensate these losses. So that's at stake. And when we talk about attribution of past events, of course, we have some knowledge, and the literature and the science has contributed a lot with respect to giving advice on how climate change will affect crop production in the future. But for past events, we didn't have so much clearance, and I think now there is some momentum to get more and more understanding of how past events were already affected by anthropogenic climate change. And this makes it a bit difficult, because we have to disentangle quite different effects. Of course, there is the weather and the climate effect on the crop yield, which in turn affects also food security, as we have seen this year, for instance, in Madagascar. But there are also many other factors. We have already heard about the COVID crisis. There are economic constraints, and there are also management issues which we have to consider. So that makes it so complicated to get a clear picture, and science is now providing this picture, giving more evidence on what actually is the footprint of anthropogenic climate change in a certain event. Without the noise and the variability of the usual weather, and without any management issues considered. And this would have a clear guidance also then when it comes to talking about compensation and talking about finance mechanisms. So that's what we do. And then we work also closely together with our colleagues on FAO to detect these kind of events. So, and this is under the umbrella to give more finance for adaptation, of course, whenever it is possible. As already said, we will have also limits of adaptation, and there we need these mechanisms like the WIM, which is already at place, but also have to be fed with more information. So that's also very important. And yeah, this is in close collaboration with our colleagues. We have already some clearance, and this is a picture from the last IPCC or the current IPCC report, where we have also the picture of that we can already attribute extreme heat events and high temperatures to anthropogenic climate change. This is marked here with the reddish points. This should be the world. And you see that most of these boxes are in red. This means there is a clear picture already available. When you go down, this is on droughts. And here the picture is not that clear. There are some orange points showing there is an increase of droughts, but there are also a lot of gray boxes. And this means we don't have so much clearance on if this is already anthropogenic climate change or not. This does not say anything if it is or not, but it say we don't have enough evidence in this way. And this is only this part here of our chain, and we have to get more clearance on the anthropogenic climate change effects on crop yields, the second point, and on food security. So how this is affected in a cascadic way. So that, and this is also what we are doing, where we try to provide more evidence. Here is one example from the drought in Southern Africa. And here we can already see that with climate change, the drought in 2007 was 40% stronger than it was without climate change. This is, here you see this normal variability with the black and the red line. The red line is the model, the black line is the observation. And you could then use simulate a climate without climate change. So, and here we see this 40% of higher severity of the loss, here marked with the blue and the orange line. So you can compare these with climate change and without climate change. Of course, without is only a model run because this does not exist in reality, but we could detect these kind of losses and say, okay, this is the effect of climate change or anthropogenic climate change, which we can already see in past events. And this is, I think, one of the take-home message which I would like to give, that we have here already these kind of events which we see in the past. Here for Southern Africa, Lesotho was also highly affected, not only South Africa, and we will see this more and more, not only for droughts and not only for food insecurity events, but also for floods and for other damages in the value chain of the agri-food system. So let me conclude. I think what we need is, of course, more regional stakeholder input to get the right data in place to make these calculations, also to get more precise information on where we have losses and where we have damages in the agri-food systems. And of course, we need the scientific expertise to disentangle these kind of events and say, okay, this is really the footprint. And this is not limited to a scientific debate. Of course, this has to be transported in the political debate, and also it has to be reflected, acknowledging that we have already these losses and damages, and also making sure that we have mechanisms in place to reduce them and compensate them. So my conclusion is that we have some capacity already there. we have to also get better to rapidly detect these kind of losses and damages whenever some events occur. And this has to be then brought directly to the mechanisms we have already in place, like the WIM or the Santiago network. And I guess we will see in the next, let me guess, in the next 3 years, for every event, a much clearer picture on what was the actual footprint of anthropogenic climate change. And I guess this is very encouraging. That science has provided this knowledge, and yeah, happy to hear the discussion which we will have now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Christoph. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for that very concise overview of climate attributions in context of disaster and climate risk management in agricultural sector. And also we would like to commend you for your interdisciplinary research where you aim to improve food security and resilience in tropical agricultural systems throughout. So thank you very much for that. We really appreciate it. Now we'd like to move to our panel discussions, if we may. We have Mr. Tekini Nakadikida, I hope he's here with us. And then we have Miss Christine Arnold and Piero Conforti. I think, who's here in person? Okay, that's it. Okay. So we have one person virtually here. Okay. Is Mr. Tekini here with us? No. So you are
Work? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yes, sorry, there's been a slightly change. My name is Giorgia Pergolini. I work for the Work for Program. Yes, I'm replacing my colleague Kristen this morning. Thank you so much
Welcome.
for that.
Okay. I don't think we have. So let me move to just for the sake of time. Is Miss Kristen is here? I think I see. I don't see her either. Let me, if you allow me, since I see Piero is here, if I will start with you, Piero, for the sake of saving time until we get someone, because I don't see the other two panelists online. Do we agree that I start with Piero now, and then once we get, allow me to do that. Okay. So let me introduce to you Mr. Piero Conforti, who is the deputy director. Who is the Deputy Director of the Statistics Division at FAO headquarters. He is an agriculture economist with experience on topics related to food security, undernourishment, agriculture and food markets, agriculture and trade policy analysis, social statistics, rural livelihood, monitoring of SDG indicators, damage and loss from natural and man-made disasters. Mr. Piero, buongiorno, good morning. Sorry you're not here with us. So allow me to kickstart this this panel discussion, if I may, to ask you if you can share with us what are the pathways to transform the agri-food systems more sustainable and resilient to climate and disaster shocks. Over to you, Piero.
Many thanks. First of all, it's a great pleasure to be here, even though only virtually. It's a pity I could not make it to Sharm el-Sheikh. It would have been a great enriching experience, so I'm very happy anyway to contribute remotely to this discussion. Now, what are the pathways? Of course, I mean, it's a very complex question. I will not try to offer a definite answer. I will try to propose a perspective. As you might be aware, we at FAO work a lot with data. Data is one of the areas of work that is central to our organization. And I mean, data is important in many respects, and we believe it is very important also in this context. Essentially, having good data is the key to be able to action things, to be able to inform sound policy making. And the area of damage and loss from extreme events related to climate change and not related to climate change is a very important and emerging area in which we have been trying to contribute in the last few years in different ways. One way, and that's my personal entry point, is by trying and improve the information base. I believe the information base is very important because, I mean, is like data is like the equivalent of what you can see when you drive a car. If you drive a car, you need to see what happens around you. If you don't have data when you design policy and try to address complex matters like the impact of extreme event related to climate change and the impact of extreme event in general, it would be like driving being blind. So it's important to have data. And data in this area is very scarce. It's particularly scarce in agriculture. No? We know that agriculture is a very sensitive sector in many countries. And by agriculture, we always mean agriculture, fishery, and forestry. So, I mean, this is the way we conceive the sector. So the whole of primary activities, they work at the junction between human and natural resources. So they are, of course, very sensitive to the impact of extreme. So in the past, our way to contribute to this has been trying to give more information and help colleagues and countries around the world trying to get better data, more organized data, so that this can be used to, let's say, inform better decisions, including the one of transforming the actions that do incentivize and do promote the transformation of rural and agricultural systems. So in the past, what we've been doing is been working on two fronts, more or less, for this. And one front is the one of trying to leverage what exists. Since 2015, we've been producing a report, and we are now producing one more issue of this same report in collaboration with our colleagues from Potsdam and several other colleagues around the world that looks at trying to take stock of what happened. So trying to make an assessment. What is the impact of these events in agriculture? What of this impact is related to climate change? And you saw from the very good presentation of Professor Gournot how complex is this matter, right? It's tangling different factors. So we try to work on the evidence on one side and trying to, on our side, design methodologies for countries to collect better data. This, of course, has an interaction with the monitoring exercises that are happening in the international framework, such as the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and at the same time the SDG, where there are indicators that are relevant and speak to what we call the damage and loss. Of course, we are working on the loss and damage for the specific climate change damage and the damage and loss. We are trying to bring together these two pieces in under one umbrella, which is essentially different. So I would say working on one side to design methodologies to collect data effectively, at the same time helping countries in a factual way to support data collection. That's the other element that we really care a lot about. And this we have been now piling up a little bit of experience that we can use and put at the disposal of the international community to do this. Of course, collecting data on the impact of extreme event is difficult. First, there are two layers in a way. So there are the data collection that happen right after the events, okay, which are very rich, sometimes very useful. The post-disaster risk assessment type of information, etc. This is crucial information. At the same time, we believe that it's important to embed in the statistical system one way of taking stock of what really happens beyond the emergency. No? So there should be some kind of, we believe, equipment of the statistical system to being able to look beyond the emergency. So to look and to accumulate data that can be useful for policy making on what is happening through time. We are trying to contribute in this respect also with the preparation of these global reports. So this would be my answer, and of course I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Thank you, Piero, for that. Just as a follow-up question, Piero, any good examples on LD and DRM that have been implemented successfully that you can share with the audience, please? Over to you.
Yes, indeed. I mean, some countries have good data, not very many, but sometimes some countries have good data. I don't know. I mean, it's always difficult to point to specific examples, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, countries that are prone to extreme events that tend to have good statistical system, and comes to my mind, for instance, the example of the Philippines, other countries. One thing that should be noticed is that there are some countries, I mean, the countries who have the possibility are investing heavily in this field, and this is something very visible. Just to give you perhaps a relatively expected example of a country that is investing heavily, this is the US, that is investing in a very articulated system that combines artificial intelligence with GIS technologies, with satellite data, with the on-the-ground monitoring. I mean, you need all these elements together. Of course, this is one example. All is to say that in many countries we have to, the successful cases are the one in which there is an investment in new technologies that can actually result in lowering the cost of getting the information. And I'm thinking particularly of the remote sensing type of activity. The other thing I can say is that we have been in touch with a number of countries who showed a lot of interest in the last few years on particularly the impact of extreme events in agriculture and data collection. We've been supporting countries in Central Europe and Eastern Europe. Central Asia and Eastern Europe. We have been running, let's say, technical assistance projects and in support of countries like Armenia or Macedonia or Kyrgyzstan. We have an active operation in Latin America that is looking at how to collect data and to support countries in collecting data in this field. Many countries are expressing interest. Of course, it's also a matter of finding the necessary resources. And our action is mostly aimed at trying to support countries that are willing to invest in sort of systematic data collection. So looking just beyond what happens in the emergency. So there are examples of countries that have good data, and we believe a lot can be done in terms of leveraging technologies and modern technologies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Piero, for that intervention. Now I would like to move to Ms. Georgia from the World Food Program. Maybe you'd like to come up here. If you don't mind, I'd like to ask you just what is WFP's, let's say, overall vision or the pathways, how to transform the agri-food systems to be more resilient, of course, to the theme of this, where we are today for climate and disaster shocks. How is it seen by WFP?
It looks like it's okay. Just get it closer. Wow. Thank you. First of all, thank you to the moderator for the question and speakers online, audience online, and you're here today. I know we are very tired after 2 weeks of COP. This should have been the last day, probably will not. So I really appreciate that we are here in person and online to keep the conversation alive. And I do hope we can be here, convey this energy to the people in the other side of the venue still negotiating probably until night today. So thanks so much for being here. So to reply to this question, I think it's important to share something that is key to understand. And I do know that we all know these things. We are climate experts after all. This is why we are in COP. But it's important to me to remind that climate change is a risk multiplier, meaning that it exacerbates situations that are already vulnerable. So if there's a conflict or a famine or anything that is already impacting a country, climate change will make it worse. And that's where WFP is most concerned and where we develop our intervention. And we see this every day through climate shocks, so more sudden storms, floods, drought, just breaking down the food systems. But also the slow onset events. So we're talking about sea level rise, soil degradation, that also is breaking down our food systems. So feel like we're being attacked from two fronts here, and that's where we need to jump in and help the people. So when we talk about solutions, because I do think it's important to share solutions rather than just the concept, is that we're talking about activities that prevent the impacts of a climate disasters in the first place, so that people can respond to it, so build back better, and mostly reduce the impacts to the extent that we can. So this is very important for WFP, as WFP, for those who are not very familiar with it, is the largest humanitarian organization of the UN. So our objective is to develop a series of activities that can help the vulnerable people and countries on the front line of the climate crisis in reducing these impacts of disaster risk and responding in the most efficient way to them. So we do that through what's like technical terms is the disaster risk management or integrated approach. Just a big, big word to say that we want to anticipate the impacts that the disaster may have. So working before that a climate hazard turns into a disaster. We do that through early warning, forecast-based financing, anticipatory action. Again, super big, boring words, but just to say that we support people, we enable people to make informed decisions before a climate occurs, so even before they know how to face the consequences. We're not saying that we are reducing at all the consequences, because consequences will be there. That's the case for loss and damage, but at least we are preventing the worst from happening. I spoke a lot about protection. That's also important. When we cannot anticipate or act before, it's important that we still provide the means for people to protect themselves. This is done through safety net, insurance, so basically triggering payouts for people to compensate for the losses and damage that they're experiencing. We also work in restoring degraded environments, so creating a natural buffer to protect against the climate shocks. So restoring lands when there's soil degradation, even building forests that can protect from flooding, for example. Finally, for those who don't know, WFP is also very known for an aid delivery, at food agency delivery. So we do deliver food also. But we want to make sure that the food we deliver is cooked and consumed in a safe way for the environment. So we're also working on sustainable energy resources. So providing schools, for example, with sustainable energy sources to cook the food, and also communities. This is an approach that is integrated, as I said before. So these things cannot happen one after the other, or one here and another there. No, this needs to be integrated at the whole time. So this requires effort. This requires climate finance to flow towards the right direction. And mostly this requires our help and support there every day. So last year only, we helped 37 countries with these approaches, reaching 12 million people, which is nothing compared to the number of people that is suffering today, that is impacted by the consequences of climate change. But if we do our small parts, and then you do your small parts, we all are part of a bigger puzzle, and we can make the difference. So that's my key takeaways for you today to conclude this 2 weeks of COP. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was very well put. Before opening up the discussion and to the floor and also online, allow me just to just interject here that a key point that was mentioned by Georgia is climate finance. I think this is really what it's all about. I think we are here to witness this in the last 12 days. But this event being focused on scaling up, I think it's really important that we keep in mind the focus on concrete tools and actions to tackle the increasing impact of disasters, including climate-related and protracted nature of food crisis on many vulnerable communities throughout the world. So without any further ado, I would like to, the panelists are here, anyone in the audience, just if you have any questions, if you have any follow-ups for the panelists, this is your opportunity now to raise your hand or ask for any clarifications. It seems that these 12 days at COP has worn you all out. We have one question. May I hear out? Please introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Dr. Sisai Sinamo from Ministry of Health, Ethiopia. So I wanted to bring the nexus between disaster crisis and development. So how are we looking at it into this discussion? Because usually the transition from disaster and disaster crisis towards transitioning to development is important for the resilience and also sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to take that question? Piero or Professor Christoph? Any comments from your side?
I'm happy to say a few words, but I mean, this is, again, from my perspective, the importance of setting up statistics system on these matters is precisely catering to the effort of going beyond what is the emergency and trying to link it up with the development. No? So in a way, if you want to have a system in place that allows you to invest in resilience, invest in adaptation and mitigation to climate change, etc., you have to have a good information basis to design that to begin with, when you are not under the pressure of the emergency of responding to disaster, which of course calls more for the humanitarian side of the issue. And on this, I mean, we're happy to collaborate with WFP. I mean, our two organizations are sisters. They work together on a number of things, so we support each other, I would say. And but this is one case in point in which really the transition from the emergency requires a good information base. So to give you a simple example, if we don't know what is the livelihoods of the small-scale farmers which are affected by one disaster, when the disaster hit in that area, it is more difficult to design policies that do enhance their resilience, that do enhance their preparedness, so that they can get less affected when a disaster hits. So that's a little bit the logic. Of course, my bias is that I see it from the information point of view. But we also think that the information is important to build, okay, whatever condition of ability to react and mitigate and adapt to this kind of extremes, including those that are generated by climate. Thanks.
Thank you, Piero. Professor?
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, just a very short comment on this. So I think, first of all, it's very important not to play this against each other. We have to acknowledge that we need all of these components, and we have to invest more in development cooperation. We have to invest more in building a resilient system. But we will also face the situation that we have certain events where also within resilient system, we will come beyond the limits of adaptation, and there we need just disaster risk reduction, and we need other mechanisms at place to compensate these losses and damages. And I think this is not an either or investing more here, then we could reduce our investments there, but we need them both strongly in place. And I think that's very important. And I would also underline what Piero just said, and investing in having the right information at place, the right data is so crucial. And we talked about, and Piero talked about, having the data after a shock is very important. And I would only underline that this is very crucial. Immediately after the shock, the data should be there. But also, I would also mention that we also need baseline data. So if a shock occurs and we have not collected data beforehand, we have no information on what the situation was before the shock. So also making sure that we have data in place in many fields. I mean, this is related to the health sector, this is related to the agriculture sector, and they are also interconnected with each other. And I think that's so important.
Thank you. Georgia, any comments?
It's working? Yes. No. Yes. Thank you. Maybe a last one. I really like the question and the point raised. I do think it's crucial that we break this cycle of crisis response. This is not working. This is proven that it's not working so far, even if you consider that climate change will exacerbate this crisis. So there will be more crises, more responses, but with the resources we have today, that's simply not enough. So how to break this cycle? As I said before, I do think that climate finance here plays a big role, and I'm happy the other speakers support this point. And I might be a bit biased because climate finance is my area of work, but I do think that if climate finance starts flowing towards the right direction, so towards a project for climate change adaptation, for example, and also in the future considering a financial mechanism for loss and damage, this will make the difference. So we know there will be more crises, more need of responses, but we will come prepared, and we can finally break this cycle and build sustainable food systems.
Thank you, Georgia. Any more questions, any feedbacks? What I see here is that the clear message that the need to further invest in strengthening risk information systems to inform disaster and climate actions for accelerating implementation on the ground. That's really a very key message here. And also the other message is the need to enhance multi-risk governance and risk financing mechanisms at national, subnational, and local levels. Another message, the need to further promote the adaptation and upscaling of resilient agriculture good practices at farm and landscape levels. The need to strengthen countries' capacities on preparedness and anticipatory action ahead of multiple disaster and climate shocks and stresses. And one of the most important one is the need to enhance partnerships and engage with different actors and sectors. Reducing disaster and risk losses is a prerequisite for achieving the goals of eradicating extreme poverty, ending poverty, and ensuring food security and nutrition for all. Climate action within and across agri-food systems are urgently needed to end hunger and to reduce and better manage further impacts from climate change and disasters. Finally, in partnership with all stakeholders, including the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact, World Food Programme, of course, and FAO, and us, we are committed to support countries to transform our agri-food systems for the achievement of a zero-hunger world with zero climate-related disasters. Only together we can achieve this common goal in building resilient societies and leaving no one behind. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't have any more questions, I know we've had a long 12 days here. I want to take this opportunity to thank our panelists. I want to thank everyone who made the effort to come here today. Thank you, Georgia, for being here from WFP, our sister organization, whom we work very closely with. I want to thank, of course, Professor Christophe Gournod for his time. Thank you so much for being here. Piero, who is one of us. Thank you, Piero, for your time this morning. I want to take this final opportunity to really thank the whole team that's here in setting up this event, although it's, as I said, it's at the 11th hour. Thank you all very much. This concludes our event. And thank you to the panelists, and wish you all a safe journey back to your destinations, and wish you a good weekend ahead and a good day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks a lot. Great pleasure.